last few years, there's been a lot of publicity, not good publicity, about the plight of people bullying members of the LGBTQ community. Well, our next guest knows all about that and combating it, and also how to combat violence through peaceful mediation. Welcome, Darlene Weide. How are you?
Thank you so much. Great.
Tell me about your work specifically with the community board and the work you do for peaceful mediation, and then we'll get into some of the LGBTQ bullying work you do.
Okay, that's great. So community boards is the very oldest and longest running public mediation center in the country. And community boards started in San Francisco in 1976, so we're almost 40 years old. And it developed and pioneered a model called community mediation. And community mediation essentially provides training and skills for regular folks like us who are interested in helping their own community resolve conflicts peacefully and collaboratively.
So this isn't the sort of thing where I have a problem with my neighbor, so I'm going to call you. This isn't about replacing...
That is that. That is the model that community boards started by a gentleman named Raymond Schoenholtz, who was a law professor, who thought that most conflict really didn't need to be headed to the courts. Most conflict, when people hire attorneys, maybe there could be a different way. And so together with a group of radical 70s folks, it was a different time, with a great spirit of innovation, decided to pioneer this model.
So no, he started teaching this model, but then he turned it into something that could be replicated, correct?
That's exactly right.
And you have been its executive director for...
8 years.
So now, are you a trained attorney?
No, I'm not an attorney.
You know, I'm supposedly named for 2 attorneys. So I grew up among lawyers. Someone has a problem with their neighbor, or maybe they have a problem in school with another kid or something.
Right.
How do we, one, convince people that this can be resolved without lawyers? But I think more to the point that I want to get into is how this can be resolved without fisticuffs.
That's exactly right. So there's a number of different ways. So first of all, most people are pretty conflict avoidant. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter.
You think that's built into our DNA?
I think it's built in. I think that most people are pretty conflict avoidant, and they'll sit with a conflict for a very long time. And very, very few people have really had a sense from growing up, however we get the message, that conflict is positive, that conflict can be good. Most people, if you ask them, they will say that when they think of conflict, they feel afraid, they feel anxious, they feel upset, and it's something that they want to avoid. At community boards, what we really try to help people understand is that that first of all, conflict is inevitable, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen here in the workplace. It's going to happen in our neighborhoods. It's going to happen inside of our homes, and that something actually positive can come from it. There's been tons of people who have studied conflict intensively, and they've recognized that you need to have conflict in order for groups to be more productive. And so community boards, we recognize that if we can help people understand that something positive can come from it, and that how do you get something positive from it is by talking about it.
Right.
And so that's what we do. And we have trained over 17,000 people since 1976 to help people resolve their conflicts peacefully.
And this costs nothing.
And it costs nothing or a small fee.
Right. So it's cheaper than lawyers, but also it sounds to me like, I mean, I'm not being silly at all, but in the model of your founder, as you said, this radical 70s guy, you're trying to change society.
There is definitely a foundation of democracy in this idea that communities can help each other to strengthen communities that they live in. And back in the olden days, in the early 70s, there were 12 community boards. Let me just clarify that the name community boards. And what it means is the board, a panel. It could have been called community panels. It's a board of community mediators helping to support a group of people or 2 people, however many, come to the table in resolving their conflicts peacefully. And we have now over 350 trained volunteer community mediators. We have a whole cadre of folks so diverse. It's really fantastic, who have received the basic 40-hour basics of mediation training. Many of them have, many mediations under their belt, and it's a skill that you really can only develop by practicing.
Right. So now, this practice is something that anyone could take the 40 hours of training. Well, let's say I don't want to become a professional mediator.
Right.
Is this the sort of training that might help me deal with just my conflict avoidance, or how I deal with a conflict in the home or the workplace?
Sure, it would be fabulous. And so many people take the training and they don't end up volunteering to be a mediator, but those are great skills to use with your neighbor. I mean, with
probably
your
sometimes
workplace.
with your spouse.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, every year you give a series of awards called the Peacemaker Awards,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
And one is to an organization, and then there are 2 other individual awards. Talk
Right.
to me about the awardees this year. First, the
Okay.
organization, and then I think you have an adult, and then you also have a
That's
team.
right.
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, we community boards decided that it was really important to raise the visibility of conflict resolution in San Francisco. And that if San Francisco is a very special place, and if we want to continue keeping it special, we really need to encourage dialogue, collaboration, and conflict resolution throughout the city. And so, although we are doing it day in and day out, we recognize that there are many organizations and many people who are also passionately committed to conflict resolution. And if we could kind of get together, all together once a year, and really celebrate it in a very visible way with our civic leaders, with judges, with lawyers, with community activists, it would really strengthen all of us together. And so we have, on June 5th, the San Francisco Peacemaker Awards, and we sent out months ago a request for nominations, and nominations, name after name, poured in, and we sorted through all of these incredible, very wonderful, deserving individuals with a committee, and we selected 3 amazing award winners this year, and I'd love to tell you about them.
Please do.
Okay, so the Raymond Schoenholtz Visionary Peacemaker Award this year is going to a woman. Her name is Valerie Toulier, and she is a treasure, a San Francisco treasure. She works and lives in the Mission. She's been involved in youth development and advocacy on the city level and on the state level for reducing gang violence, for peaceful collaboration, and she is now chair of this incredible collaboration called the Mission Peace Collaborative.
And I understand she has a nickname among her community, the Mama Bear,
Yeah,
I believe
people
they
call
call
her
her.
Mama Bear. I think she's fiercely devoted to youth and youth development, and I think that's why she has that fabulous nickname. And she is, born and raised in San Francisco and doing very hard work in a neighborhood that's going through a lot of changes and where there's a lot of conflict.
Yeah. And the youth awardee?
And the youth award is this incredible senior at a school called June Jordan School for Equity in the Excelsior neighborhood. It's a public school. He's a senior, and his name is Jamark Allen Henderson. And he is a youth that has participated in a program that's led by an organization called Peer Resources, and they train young people in the schools to be peer mediators.
That's got to be even more challenging for an adult, because if it's hard enough for, one of us who supposedly has education and experience to put aside raw emotion and settle something peacefully, what about a kid who's dealing with, well, a lot of emotion and a lot of hormones? I mean, how do you teach mediation to a teen?
Well, I will say that I think mediation should be taught to very young children, honestly, as a core capacity.
Yeah.
That takes, it's not something that we should really wait, truthfully,
Right.
until people
Well,
are.
I mean, of course,
Yeah.
I'm just being flip. But,
Yeah.
part of the other work you do is, teaching, raising awareness about LGBTQ bullying. How do these 2 strands of your work come together? And how can you mediate someone who wants to, disparage or bully a member of the LGBT community,
Right.
especially a young person who's dealing with so much?
Well, 2 things I'd love to say about that. First of all, the peer mediation programs for high school students, community boards pioneered a school-based model back in the early 80s, and community boards has trained over 3,000 schools across the country in helping students provide mediation to other students. And it turns out that students really prefer to go to other students for support rather
Right.
than getting help from a teacher.
They feel more comfortable.
They do feel more comfortable. And we recognize that these skills around understanding and being able to talk about feelings has to start at a really young age. and developing empathy, which is a key skill in conflict resolution, and anti-bullying work, and tolerance development, diversity work starts at a really, really young age. And so a number of years ago, we authored, in collaboration with some wellness programs at the Unified School District here in San Francisco, a simple curriculum for elementary school teachers to utilize to develop more on the spectrum of prevention to help students deal with differences as they come up in schools that can end up being complicated for them.
So you don't think it's ever too young to start teaching mediation?
I don't think it's ever too young. There are preschools in San Francisco that have peace tables in the classroom that develop very simple protocol with students. So when conflict arises, the 5-year-olds, the 4-year-olds already have some skills to sit down and talk about how this incident affected them.
We've only got a few moments left. If you had to explain to someone why mediation, I want to say better, but let me rephrase it. What would you like someone to know about mediation versus quote-unquote litigation or the potential for violence? Why mediation? What would you like people to understand that this is a good possibility? Because I think some people just think, oh, mediation, it's like if you don't have enough money for a lawyer.
Okay, so mediation is a voluntary process. Mediation allows you an opportunity to talk about the problem directly without the involvement of courts and without the involvement of police and lawyers. 85% of people who go through mediation end with an agreement that they feel really great about, and 6 months later they have stayed with their agreement. And that's a much higher success rate than what happens with the jury or with the judge. There's something about being in control of the decision that you get to make in that room, which is very, very powerful. And I think that in the state of California, what happens in the mediation room is also not admissible evidence in court. So if you decide to go that way, you can. Why not try mediation first?
Right. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Okay.
We've been speaking about the importance of mediation and how, in a sense, to turn swords to plowshares in a very real way. Next up, something a little bit lighter. We're going to talk about this year's summer movies with everyone's favorite celebrity and film blogger, Jason Leroy. We'll be right back.